some Orthodox material for us like I usually do. Hope everyone's doing good. It's a rainy evening here in Nunwelk, which means hopefully it'll be a quiet night. The first reading that I have for us tonight is called The Soul That Has Found Heaven, about the poet Evgeny Semichev and his poetry by Marina Biryukova. For me, the meeting with the poet Evgeny Semichev, 1952 through 2026, began with the news of his death. A great Russian poet has passed away. This was said on the page of the Archangelsk literary magazine Dvina. It turned out to be really big and really Russian. Lopatino was the native village of the father. Sometimes in my childhood, my grandmother put me flimsy on a hospital plane shovel in the stove, so that in my boyish body of illness, the last ember does not fade, and poured fermented brine, expelling the sick spirit from the body, and rubbed with salty soap foam, so that my soul burned hot. I came out of the stove, red hot with a toasted and grated roll. I was taken from a fiery shovel and carried by my grandmother on her hand with a bow, as if to the royal chambers, to the world of God on an embroidered towel. I eagerly listened to my grandmother's fairy tales and ate my grandmother's pies, and he understood. This show was not quite right, that he did not climb into the stove of Grandmother Yaga, or childhood, you are a winged linen towel. As long as I live in the world, Lopatino and the bread shovel, not without reason I call my dear father not fly in the sky on a broomstick, but on the ground you shoveled your bread. The selection that accompanied the obituary of Dvina contained poems about the Great Patriotic War. Few of the authors of the post-war generation spoke about it, and memory was such a force. The sky blossomed with May fireworks, glorifying spring and victory. A literal echelon is going on in the sky. Fallen soldiers are coming. Through the floods of blooming spring, through the heavenly tabernacles, fallen warriors ride from the war. To our descendants to come, past the porch, my native village, past factories and arable land, all of them were gathered in one echelon by our sacred memory. Flashes of peaceful dawn rise to the heights of the heavens. In the spring sky soar Sassari like triangles of letters. A roar embraces the heavenly distance of the Father's native district. The sun is scratched like a medal for military merit. The heads of the warriors are snow white, faces are bright and fearless. Here they are, the eagles of the Russian victory, the falcons of our motherland. Their bell rings, glorifying spring and victory. A literal echelon is marching in the sky. Fallen soldiers are coming. Briefly, biography. Evgeny Nikolaevich Semichev was born in the city of Novokubieshevsk near the present-day Samara. He grew up without a father. Nikolai died at the factory from electric shock, was brought up in a boarding school. Later, he said that it was the boarding school that instilled in him a sense of equality and brotherhood with all, the habit of living openly in front of them. Zhenya Semichev's literary talent was noticed by his teacher, Karina Borodina, whom he remembered and thanked all his life. Howdy, brothers and sisters. Good to see you. In 1969, the Novokubieshevsk newspaper Banner of Communism first published the poems of the 17-year-old Yevgeny. In 1971, he graduated from the Kubieshev Institute of Culture, receiving the specialty of directing the folk theater. Working as an actor, he traveled around the country, saw its beauty and scope, then became the director of Novokubieshevsk House of Culture. The first book was published in 1991 when the author was already under 40. Then there were many books, many literary awards. There was fame, wonderful friends, and a bright, firm life position. The poet lived and died in his native Vogel city. But in addition to the external biography, there is also an internal spiritual path. And on the path of Evgeny, two things were most clearly connected: poetry and the Orthodox faith. Here is how the poet told about it in an interview with the Samara Orthodox newspaper, Blagovest. My grandparents are villagers. There were icons at home. Orthodox holidays were celebrated, and people went to church 5 kilometers away. There they baptized me, saying, "May the Lord protect the orphan." And only for me in the village, there was an opportunity to get into a dream, into a fairy tale, into a mystery. All the villagers were in the church in elegant clothes as if at a holiday. It was a joy to see the burning of candles on the majestic candlesticks. The church singing touched my soul very much. The services were impressive. At this moment, a poetic mood was born. Apparently, my soul responded to poetry thanks to these first experiences of grace. In church, for the first time, I caught a poetic state. I felt that it was mine. He went to church with great pleasure. I did not understand many things, but I absorbed everything and was imbued with the atmosphere of high poetry. The child's soul responded to this majestic beauty, and all these years I've been trying not to spill that state and carry it within myself through all the difficulties of life. So faith came and brought me poetry. Old women's deep faces, heavenly flashes in them, sad like lightning, deep wells of the steppe. My mother prays, blessing the porch with a cross, and God's universal battle is reflected by her face. Flash after flash, fiery flash, float like wave after wave, and I, like my God's sunflower, make my earthly path. Old women's deep faces burn in the Lord's fire. Let me, mother, lean my cheek against your heavenly depths. In order to speak about faith in real verses and not just a rhymed text of religious content, the latter, alas, is innumerable. It is necessary that poetry in a person is born in the same place as faith, where there is love for Christ, that is at the very depth, at that depth of man, which in God's coordinates turns out to be the height. Then you will write, "These sad stars in the gloomy heights, Lord, your bitter tears are for me. Why do you hide from me in the twilight a mournful face? And why do you weep? You are so great." Yes, God is perfect, great, self-sufficient, and unchanging. He cannot be harmed. But God is love, and love cannot remain indifferent if the beloved suffers, but also to his sorrow for us. This is known to the heart, which is finally softened and wept. Man's tears of repentance give hope to all creation, to all fallen world. The world is reflected in a tear and feels a connection. The internet's just set here tonight because there's a storm and I'm in a remote fly-in village in Alaska, so forgive me. I'm watching to see when it kicks out and I left off. The world is reflected in a tear and feels a connection with the sky. Wash your shoes with tears so as to not drag dirt into the sky. How sentimental old people are. A little in tears in their eyes, what mysteries do they comprehend in divine tears? Goodbye to old people's whims. A blind soul looks at you barely breathing through the tears of optical lenses. If a person makes the right the only saving inner choice, this choice turns out to be both courageous and deeply humble. The devil famously dances, tap dancing, throws sparks in pitch black hell. I'll send him red-haired to go to hell and go the other way. That road that is forgotten by all, where the hooves do not rumble, but cry in dashing thunderstorm, knocking out their stone tears. And let it be said of me afterwards that he did not value a damn thing about life, and he was foolish and stubborn like a donkey who carried Christ on himself. Semachev's poem Procession of the Cross was a kind of test for me. I had immediately felt a depth meaning in it, but I could not immediately formulate this meaning for myself. I dream of a religious procession and a sad boy. He's 10 years old, and the cross is so heavy. Banners behind their backs float in the darkness of the surrounding area, and bitter is the land of the earth, and sweet paradise is the heavenly paradise. And a voice from heaven, a harsh hulk, bear your cross, carry it, beloved child. In the dream, the poet meets himself, a child whose fate is already predetermined, on whom a cross has already been laid, and he feels it. Although more than anything else in the world, he just wants to live. Above him is my star, and there is no escape. We cannot get away from the last judgment with him. And I'm 10 years old, and I would have to live. In the distance, like sunrise, trembles sadly like a lamp. Smoke is waving over the roofs of huts to the people of darkness, and the cross is carried by a child. Above, I've spoken about the poet's bright and firm social position, but what can we call it, this position? Pochevniki, protective. It is perhaps best to call it simply love for Russia, with true filial love, humble to the state of infancy. Heaven's searching flame, the height reflected in the river, Russia speaks to us, and you have to be not a person not to understand it. Let us like a child. A short line brilliantly describes the process of spiritual nourishment and growth in an ordinary person. The mystery of love for that which gave birth to and nourished is performed at the same depth and height as the mystery of acquiring faith. The poet discovers for himself that it is loved by God. The gray moon dived behind the milky cloud, and the fog over the river is red. It is our God who breathed in the universal cold and warns Russia on the exhale. The firmament blazes like a bonfire of dawn over the dull worldly roadlessness, and Russia will not perish as long as it lives on the salvific exaltation of God. In vain do the clicks bury her heartbreakingly. You don't have to feast on the bones. In vain the crow swirls over her. Do not eclipse the Russian sun for him. And Russia will remain at all times because for eternal years she is washed by the universal light of God and warmed by the breath of the Lord. And once again, let us pay attention here as in the previous poem. Love implies the closest connection, direct bodily contact, the mother's milk and the warmth of the father's breath. The poet's love for the motherland is a love that accepts suffering. If Russia is God's punishment for me, O God, prolong my punishment. This is how he concludes the poem. A short path from paradise to paradise, where paradise before heavenly paradise is the homeland. The poet's love for Russia is a reciprocal love and tender in the true sense of the word. And it is also a love responsibility that does not end in death. Destined for me, however, soon to collect the travel bag of the motherland of my sorrow and sickness, can you entrust them to whom? And one fine day in the rainbow garden of Gethsemane, I, like this passing rain, will pass under the window of the Lord. God will say to me, you did not come for the sake of self-interest, and in the bag of what? The homeland of my sorrow and illness. Can you leave them to anyone? In Semachev's poetry, a sober attitude to his native country and people is organically combined with admiration for the Russian spirit. The Russian character, the Russian man who, despite a mass of weaknesses and shortcomings, in his simplicity somehow imperceptibly, becomes a true man of God and is worthy of love. And though this is written about Russia, this also speaks to our men here that have been so broken. I know so many feel so broken and defeated. The system's trying to crush us, trying to squeeze every bit of hope out of us. And we have to hold on to God. With all our heart, hold on to God. A man sleeps covered with burdock, noon, meadow, June rings at its zenith. Who has now thought about... I'll start that poem over again. A man sleeps covered with burdock, noon, meadow. June rings at its zenith. Who has now thought about the bad? Move away from the poem. In order not to disturb the short sleep, drag out the pause to the limit. Do not dust before his eyes with an evil soul. Worries about bread, his body lies peacefully in the seventh in the brightest heaven. Grasshoppers forge his sleep, swallows and killer whales twist, angels of heaven sing, shepherdless play and pipe, so that he may see at least in a dream that which in this life he has passed. Who stood quietly aside, come, he is already awake. Yes, Samachev could be read carefully, paying attention to the simplest words, to the modest, most, it would seem, to the most modest, it would seem, line, it can contain a life instructive meaning. Those who stood quietly to the side come up. Whoever looks at the world and people humbly, who does not ram the world with his own eye, who is able to be silent. What do you come to? To love, hope, and faith, to the discovery of your own people. It only seemed to you that there was nothing to discover in them, and their universal mission. The sinful world would have long ago fallen into the pit of fire-breathing waters if my lost Russian people had not crowded on the edge. I want to cite here a poem that shook me to my already spiritual depths, about how the spirit of a Russian warrior suddenly awakens in the most seemingly pitiful, defenseless, and outcast. It turns out unnecessary, but it indicates something very necessary for each of us. The regiment was disbanded goodbye, the army that has gone to the reserve. The Yellow House credited the decommissioned uniforms to the balance sheet. The madmen were given overcoats of rough army cloth, and they, sick, began to sing, lined up in line, get up, country. There was a screech of torn metal in the voices that sounded at odds, but the huge country did not rise from the ruins to a new mortal battle. Dogs whined in the yard, they pressed their ears and tails, the orderlies, brave warriors. Oshalev hid in the bushes. Brought to the point by the song, the nurse shouted on the run, "Do not be sad, dear sons, we will not surrender alive to the enemy." And they went in column, brother after brother, to defend the great country, the last soldiers of the motherland, to their last war. Yes, when dealing with Samachev, you return to war, willingly or unwillingly, because the poet himself, who was born, as already mentioned, 7 years after the victory, returned to it. His creative realizations revolve around in ceremonial military crews, great glory floors of the country, and the children of the victorious front stand at the sidelines of the war. And my mother stands with them and waves her hand to the heroes. Salute mana. From heaven splashes like a river over the motherland, behind the backs of well-dressed citizens, not at all embarrassing their appearance. On a box of shells and tears my mother stands. That's how she stood all the war, because she's small and sprout. She's equipped, shells, and lived by faith and victory. Not that my mother is offended, that the valiant labor was bitter, and that because of the height it is not visible, how the guardsmen march in formation. Innumerable misfortunes fell to the lot of the heroic country, and the children of the sacred victory stand at the sidelines of war. In the crowd of ceremonial mouthpieces, not in the least embarrassing their appearance, on a box of shells a military childhood stands. In some of his poems, Samachev is sharply journalistic and angry. I'm always afraid of replacing poetry with journalism. But this is not about Evgeny Nikolaevich. The strength of his talent allows him to remain a poet in civil accusatory poems too. And the main secret here probably is the accuracy of each word hitting the target. For innumerable vices in the years of national troubles, prophets appear to us like mushrooms in the world. Sorcerers and buffoons, an evil host of ignorant people, fly like locusts to the crumbs of our rosy hopes. They take out their black secrets from black books. They lick the flame with their tongues. They dance wildly on the blood. Mixtures of satanic vile forces are rising. These are demons, 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 Dostoevsky said. Samachev is a warrior. He deeply feels the spiritual battle God is waging and joins in it. Flames cut through the air, rumbling in the sky in the golden universal temple. A candle is lit. In the midst of the tearful prayer over the earth once again, the voice of God is heard preemptively and menacingly. And the sky, embraced by a roar, menacingly rushes in the fire of St. George on a flaming horse. Tearful prayer flows, angels cry in the darkness, God's battle rumbles for life on earth. Poetry is not about aligning a text to size or decorating it with rhymes. Poetry is a mystery. The poet transforms the word, revealing to us its true, original beauty and its irrational possibilities. Poetry is not identical with the words by means of which it comes to us. If a poem is exhausted by the words of which it is composed, it means that there is no poetry in it. But this again is not about Evgeny Samachev. The moonlit paths The moonlit path silvered the stubble. A window opened in the sky. This window is mine. The light sparkled at the zenith and was reflected in the pond. It is my guardian angel in the sky who has lit a star. Light wings blow, my sad gaze beckons. Maybe he's the only one who believes. He still believes in me. What shall I say in justification? How will I soothe his pain? In the face of the universe, I pray for only one thing. Let the path be silver on the black stubble. Do not close window into my sinful soul. Poetry is inconceivable without love for the world, for all living things, for all created things. And Simachev's poems, a worthy place is occupied by a struck sparrow and a dog, an elk in a suburban grove, and a cat that led its kittens around the world because its mistress died, and a tired old horse that stands in the steppe among the midnight stars, on the ground and at the same time in the sky, and a roadside flower to which the author is already to bow. Poetry does not live without compassion for all living things. Evgeny Samachev knows not how to talk about this compassion like no one else, without strain, without tears, with sniper-like, again, accuracy, to the target, to the heart. He stood on the corner near the bakery, unlucky in a draught, lost between the past and the future, with a warm French roll in his hand. And he came to him at 5 o'clock in the evening and sat down at his feet and looked lovingly and trustingly at the French bun of the puppy. And from the tender look of a puppy in the autumn draught, something warm, something aching rolled down the gloomy cheek. Something bright suddenly loomed, calling him from afar. And he left and carried away the hapless one with a bun of a French puppy. Do you see how hapless, clearly not one of the happiest and most successful man and an abandoned puppy combined into one modest, hardly noticeable, but great act of love? Who saved whom here? A man of a puppy or a puppy of a man? Of course, they save each other, becoming inseparably already in eternity. And in the same way, father and son are forever inseparable in a bitter and bright poem. As if from a wild mortal battle, a surviving tired fighter, Zurioshkin's blackened father came out of a steep binge, and enduring unbearable torment, the boy, still immature, under his father's crazy hand, clumsily put his shoulder. We walked along the blind corridor of the barracks to the steps of our native porch, and Serioska did not cry stubbornly as to offend his father in trouble. And the bright distances of the fatherland opened up the boy ahead, and the metals sobbed on the father's broad chest. Next reading that I have for us is How God Saved Us. Diary of a Prisoner of a Fascist Concentration Camp by Viktor Grigorievich, Bichikov. Viktor Grigorievich Bichikov. We have a tradition in our parish for almost 20 years on May 9. We've been going to congratulate veterans with children, whole families, large companies with flags, flowers, gifts, and guitars. We thank them for the feat, sing songs of the war years later, listen to their stories, and ask them to take a photo as a souvenir. For our children, because when they grow up, those veterans will no longer exist. There are very few of them left now. There is only one person in our city, but we congratulate labor veterans, young prisoners of concentration camps, and those who survived the siege of Leningrad. Last year, we were lucky enough to visit Viktor Grigorievich Bichikov, who was a minor prisoner of Nazi concentration camps during the war, and he brought us his diary, in which he described in detail his childhood and youth. I asked to take a picture of him, and these photos lay in my laptop for a long time. My son was learning to walk. My daughter went to first grade. Only in December did I get around to starting to turn out to be fuzzy, and only by the next May I was able to ask for the address to retake the photo, but he was no longer alive, and he lived in the house next door. I thought internet. I'm going to save this next story for better internet connection. It's just so stormy out tonight, and it's going to keep kicking out on me. Please forgive me for the bad internet connection. I do the best I can here. There's literally only like 10-foot circles where I can use my cell phone here in this village. Thank you all for joining me tonight. God bless you, and Lord willing, I'll see you again on the next one. God bless.